guys, and welcome to another Journey to Perfection, the Schematics talk show. This time we want to talk about hardcore versus casual. Did Frontier listening to the hardcore players hurt the game? And for that we have invited two guests. First one to introduce himself is BillyMFMays.
Sure thing. I've been making content on Twitch for about getting close to 3 years now. Got into Planet Coaster in Alpha 3, and since then mainly been focusing on that for my content on Twitch and on YouTube.
And another guest is okay, here we go. N7, Mike Sheets, NSYNC, Merc, Mark.
I'm looking at Merc right now.
Yeah, you're Merc.
Hey, how many times do I have to be a guest on here before I'm not a guest anymore?
Do you want to join the team, or what you want to tell me?
No, I don't want to join any more teams.
He just wants you to stop inviting him.
I'm N7 of Planet Bro Coaster. Also recently of Planet Coaster Spotlights. And you can find me on YouTube, you can find me on Twitter, and yeah, I make Planet Coaster stuff.
And now it's our turn to introduce ourselves. I'm AdfoTV. You can find my stuff on YouTube and Twitter.
And my name is Blind. I stream management games on twitch.tv/BlindIRL, and you can find me at stupidskull.com.
Hi guys, I'm Cleave. You can find me on Twitch and on Twitter.
And before we start, we have...
And YouTube sometimes.
What?
I gotta get up to the 4,000 hours.
Oh, yeah, sure. Before we start or dive into the discussion, we want to clarify what we mean by core versus casual. What is a core player and what is casual, in our opinion? Guys, what is a core player?
I think it boils down to how much time investment you have in the game. I would say a hardcore player is someone who maybe has a full grasp of like the hotkeys and maximizes their time in the game because they're so proficient with the tool set, versus someone who just picks up and just plops down stuff from the workshop.
I think for me, it very heavily depends on what your goals are when you start playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you want to play a video game, or do you want to design a video game? Or design within a video
Pretty
game?
much, yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. Actually, I want to amend my statement a little bit. I think it boils down to whether or not you utilize the workshop as a creator or as a consumer of content.
Oh, that's another way to put it too. Yeah. Sometimes I use the workshop, but yeah, I'm definitely not going to use a whole building on the workshop.
Right.
Does that make me a casual for using Fog's Fun?
No.
Yes, it does. You're totally casual.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
No, I don't think so. If your goal is to sit down and play Planet Coaster and make a park in 8 hours and you utilize 99% workshop items, you're probably a casual player.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's tons of people out there that want to consume Planet Coaster in that way, and, they buy the game. So it's important for Frontier to be able to cater to their type of gameplay style.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be a derogatory term. It's a way of figuring out what the heck the demographic is. How many core players are there, or hardcore players are there, and how many casual players are there. Mm-hmm. You'll see that the breakdown is there's a lot of casual players, but they fall off quickly after about 6 months of having the game.
I think we did notice that in terms of YouTube content for the game, and we were debating on whether or not this was even a topic, but the casual Let's Plays kind of seemed to disappear from YouTube after the game had been out for about a year, maybe less.
Yeah, once you do everything in Planet Coaster, especially before they started doing all those updates and stuff, where they added new content, then you're kind of done with it and you moved on to the next game.
Right, and I think a more hardcore player is someone that's trying to push the boundaries of what's possible in the game, and is trying to utilize the pieces to make a theme that doesn't exist, or utilize the ride switching feature that we got in a recent patch to make ride concepts that don't exist. And
yeah.
I think a core player is a person that doesn't see the items in the game as what they are supposed to be, but see the possibilities and what you can or she can make with them.
Infinite possibilities.
I have a few thoughts here. I think it's mostly just about time, because there's an illusion that all hardcore players are good and all casual players are bad.
Good point.
I think it just sticks to how much time do you dedicate to the game per day, per week. You can spend hours every day playing Planet Coaster and still probably not have a good grasp at it, or still not be pretty good at it, just like in any other game. Meanwhile, you can probably spend 1 hour per week with the game, pretty good casual level, and you could be the best builder that there ever is.
Yeah, I think that boils down to whether you consume or create content.
Yeah, which plays into that.
That's a very good point, though. There are very talented people who just don't have the time. And that's why I think casual is not a derogatory term. It's just we have to make these buckets, and we have to put people into these buckets for this discussion to work. So
Exactly.
In your opinion, what kind of game is Planet Coaster? Is it more about the design or the management? Because we have to actually sit down and look at what Planet Coaster is and what kind of audience is it attracting?
I think it's a core game and it's more a design sandbox than a management game.
I think it's a game that had aspirations to try to be both and fell short of that. And since then, it's mostly hinged on the creative sandbox side of things, but it still falls short of that, just here and there with a few things like working with scale or just not having total freedom that a lot of people want.
I kind of agree with Billy here. It's actually really interesting if you look at Frontier's previous game, Zoo Tycoon. I think that they were trying to make a more in-depth version of that and ended up kind of going way too far down each opposite deep end. So they had a management game at launch, at least, that was very good for what it was, but not compelling enough to keep people around for a very long time. And then a weirdly in-depth design sandbox. So I think Planet Coaster is a very unique case of two wildly different games that almost don't connect.
Yeah, that actually is something that I agree with completely. I think it's a design sandbox that has some management kind of band-aided on top of it. And I feel like a lot of the management is just very... It doesn't add depth to the gameplay. It doesn't make the game more fun, and I don't feel like I'm accomplishing goals when I'm doing the management in the game.
Makes it more tedious.
Right. I feel like it's just a design sandbox game. That's how I feel.
Same. I feel like it is a creative sim, and at least right now, if we were talking about game at launch, it would definitely be this weird dichotomy of it's kind of a management game, but it also has this freedom, but there's also limits to that freedom. And once they started getting rid of that, then Planet Coaster became the creative sim that it really should have been from the start.
Can I post one more thing? It's like the difference between the players that buy Gary's mod and then install Prop Hunt and only play that, and the players that made Prop Hunt.
Can you explain what you mean for players out there who may have no idea what Gary's Mod or Prop Hunt is?
Okay, well, Gary's Mod is a crazy sandbox, which is basically just a game engine with a GUI that's a little bit more approachable and simpler with a drag and drop format. Prop Hunt is a mode that was made within that game. Same with Trouble in Terrorist Town. These are games that came out of that because of people tweaking it and messing with it and changing it and working within that platform. So the difference between somebody who just plays Gary's Mod sometimes and someone who's hardcore into Gary's Mod is the people who just kind of play Gary's Mod sometimes, you know, they just download one of the pre-made games within it, or they just go on a server and they just play Prop Hunt. Whereas with someone who's hardcore into Gary's Mod, usually they're making either their own modes or they're making their own maps for those modes or something along those lines.
Okay, got it.
Well, I kind of wanted to be that when they released scenarios, but as I got further into testing of my scenarios, I felt like the game wasn't giving me enough feedback to tell me, are you doing a good or are you doing a bad? And I think even with the tools that they gave us, the management side was doomed from the start.
I think that's a really good point. I feel like the game doesn't give the player enough quality feedback at all in almost any area. I don't want to get too deep into it right now. I think we should move on, but yeah, I agree.
At least I hear a lot of people saying Frontier listens a lot to the core player, or have the feeling that they did in the past. So my question is, first of all, is that so? Second of all, why is that so? And is there a silent majority of casual players that is just unheard or never speak up for their interests?
I think listening to the core players is important for DLC sales, because you probably will rarely sell DLC to a casual or to a new player.
I kind of disagree. I think that a quality DLC license could push a sale to a player that may not have particularly been interested in the game at first.
Or that was waiting for more content to come out.
Yeah, exactly. Or bought it but then stopped playing and may pick it up again later.
Like all those people that refuse to buy The Sims until the Pets expansion comes out.
For example.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. It is also a case, though, where if we get excited about things, there's a trickle down where, you know, our word of mouth goes down to the casual level. You'll even see like a reverberation effect where if we complain about the game in any kind of aspect, you'll see more of the casual players complain about that too, even if they're not really saying the right words or going about it the right way. If that makes any sense.
Sometimes it backlashes.
Yeah.
From a distance, we're part of the hardcore audience. I don't think any of us would consider ourselves a casual player of Planet Coaster, regardless of what modes we play. Maybe this is an echo chamber problem. Maybe it's because we're not part of the casual audience. We kind of don't know how much Frontier is listening to them, if at all. Like, I know Frontier well enough by this point to know they probably respond to casual feedback exactly the same way. You know, they're very gracious and like they're a very easy developer to deal with, and they respond a lot. and they're probably doing the same thing to the casual audience.
I would say the reason why Frontier is listening to the core player, if we're talking about alpha, the core players are the ones that were looking at the pirate pieces and saying, I can make the Colosseum out of that. They weren't just gluing pieces together that they gave us. We were trying to turn those pieces into a completely different design and a different theme. And of course they're gonna take note of that and see, oh yeah, we should probably do more for that player because they are gonna be the ones that sell this game for us without having to spend any marketing dollars.
I think that actually caught them off guard at first.
Yeah.
I really don't think that they expected players to make the things that they made in Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. And I think that kind of pushed them a little bit harder. And I guess in that way, they were listening to the hardcore players indirectly because we were the only ones who had access to the game. And we were making things that would help eventually sell their game. And I think maybe it now since launch, it sort of flip-flopped. And now, of course, I would venture to say, no one hate me for saying this, the casual audience makes up probably the majority of the audience of the players of the game.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
You know, so they need to listen to those players more. It just simply makes financial sense. So I think it's flipped.
I feel like they take any sort of criticism or things that people want and they like plot it on a graph and they see, you know, where is the densest plotting of those points to figure out like where should we spend our time and money on. Things like the friction slider, even though they will say to this day the friction is fine, they gave us a friction slider to get us to shut up.
They listen to the core players because the core players listen to them about a lot of things. A huge part about being a hardcore player is learning about everything the developer has said from like the start of development to the current present. And we're able to give feedback that isn't just repeated information. You can play a drinking game in the Planet Coaster live streams about how many times people ask if this game is coming to PS4
or Mac.
Or is there multiplayer or
and like these are things that would be nice to have, but they're probably near impossibilities at this point for the game.
The question I'm asking myself is, how do casual players actually get in contact with Frontier? I mean, how many casual players are actually going to the forums and post their interests there, are watching the live streams?
Or going to Expo, or yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So isn't it way more easy for Frontier to get in contact with the core player base and kinda ignore, in air quotes, the casual player base over that?
I mean, it's really difficult to tell.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we can answer that question. Like, out of all the people watching the streams, how many casual people are watching? I don't know, because I don't read the chat.
The 10 people that asking for
PlayStation
4 port.
Or they're just memeing. It, like, you literally don't know.
That's true.
It, like, that could just be scrubbers just being all like, yo, like, when's the PS4 port?
I gotta ask Advo a question real quick. Before we started recording, Advo said he had very specific examples of Frontier listening to hardcore players and it hurting the game, and I'd like to hear what he was gonna say.
Not so much hurting the game, but yeah, there are very clear examples where Frontier listened to the core player base. One example, and the most obvious one, MIO, besides giving us the friction slider, which was basically hush money for the core player base, was how Sylph using the roofs and its angle to align items to it, to rotate them in the direction he wanted to, which was at that point clearly not intended. And I think it affected the development of the 3D gizmo in a way that wasn't planned.
That I agree with, but I think eventually the gizmo would have arrived. Before the gizmo, there was no way to position something in 3D space and move the camera around it without placing it, and then you couldn't pick it up and then move it again with having it in place. And those are like, that's core gameplay of how you build shit in Planet Coaster. So it would have happened eventually, but yeah, I see your point.
Well, yeah, you need gizmos and 3D modeling software too.
I think it happened sooner.
Is your point that if he didn't do this and we never got a gizmo, then it never would have broke? Is that where we're going with this?
No.
Okay.
I think another example is the no collision options we have in the game right now that I think Frontier didn't think of in the first place, but gave us when we complained about the massive ride skins, etc., etc. Or for example, the limit removal on the track rides and coasters that we recently got. That's another thing that the core community asked for and Frontier delivered. And I don't think they were planning on doing that in the first place. And I can personally, right now, can think of an example when the casual players spoke up and complained about something that finally got into the game, besides the scenario editor, maybe.
Fireworks,
yeah.
Management, picnic benches.
That was everybody.
First of all, it was everybody. Second of all, it was planned anyway. They teased it before the first alpha went live.
There was concept art.
It was planned, but it broke the whole sim. It took a year to implement it.
Yeah, definitely.
I think I know of one change that was strictly for the casual audience that was at the detriment to the core players, and that was the testing of transport rides that was removed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
And a hush fell over the crowd. No, that's a very good point. Yeah, because, I mean, when you're building something, you want to check clearances, or maybe even you want to make a video and you don't want to have your park open and you want the transport ride to be moving around in a circle or whatever to add ambiance. Or, I mean, I guess, there's ways around it, but, it's not as straightforward. It's like we were talking about, how do you move catwalks from the left side to the right side? Well, you have to build the track backwards. That's like an impossible, intrinsic thing. Like a player would never realize that until someone told them to do that. Like, I have thousands of hours in this game and I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And yet it also doesn't make any sense at all. Like, at the same time. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, yeah, I do.
Yeah, okay.
I know what you're talking about. Frontier's done quite a bit of stuff for casuals, but it feels like a lot of it's too late. Stuff like adding in security, more in-depth management of employees, also like fixing the UI for management, because originally the UI for management was like kind of busted in a lot of ways and super cumbersome, which is why I didn't play the management mode. I was like, yeah, no, I'm not touching this because this is a mess. So they've fixed a lot of those problems since launch, but I think they did that 6 months too late.
But I would say too little too late.
Yeah.
And the thing is, did it enrich the experience? It didn't. It just made it more tedious.
Frontier did a lot of things for the casual players as well as for the core players.
Yeah.
Kind of talking about pushing the envelope. System requirements are brutal for this game. Minimum requirements are pretty low, and you can play at that level to play like the game looking like ass, for lack of a better word. But basic requirements, the recommended one, i7 4770K. That's about that. Back at that time, that was like a $300 processor, 12 gigabytes of RAM, which is overkill for most games and most systems, and a GTX 980.
Is that recommended?
Yeah,
wow.
I don't even hit that.
That's a pretty powerful computer.
Yeah.
I think this is a really interesting topic because when you have a very in-depth game, you need to reach for as wide an audience as possible. I think that Frontier's other game, Elite Dangerous, is actually a very good example of this. Elite Dangerous has weirdly low requirements. That game runs absurdly well. It did have a lot of performance issues early on. Since then, they've completely ironed all of that out. And early on in Planet Coaster development, people were like, well, they fixed performance in Elite, so they will fix it in this.
Mike said earlier, the game is really well optimized, and I personally agree. And I think that this is something that, I don't want to label these people, but casual players are always, I see this on Reddit all the time, the game isn't optimized, it runs like crap on my computer, I can't have a park with 17,000 guests in it and 18 roller coasters, and they need to fix this. When are they improving performance? To me, the game is one of the most stable games I've ever seen.
Yeah.
The things that the game is doing are incredible, and to compare it to Elite is a little bit unfair because the amount of AI and the amount of just pure objects that are on screen are just so vastly different in the two games.
Totally.
Yeah, it's the same engine, but they're really completely different worlds, no pun intended.
I think a point that we need to make while talking about system requirements for Planet Coaster is the game runs fine on almost any mid-class computer if you use the items like they were supposed to be used.
Right, it still runs on the minimum specs.
Right.
For example, let's put a number out there. If you build a building with like 50 pieces because you use walls as walls and in-game roofs as roofs, the game runs fine.
Exactly.
And looks beautiful as well.
But when you go in the game and use like 15,000 of these wooden brackets for a shingle roof alone for one building, of course you will run into performance issues with the game. But that's not the game's fault. It's not the engine's fault. It's not Frontier's fault. It's our fault because we use way too many pieces to achieve something in the game that the game wasn't supposed to handle.
Planet Coaster, a desperate disregard for polygons.
Yeah.
Well, it's also a case where it runs well, but people are really obsessed with games running perfectly. They want 60 FPS at ultra settings at all times. And, that's really unrealistic for most sim games.
You'll never get that with a sim game.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is just something that's across the board. A problem with sim games in general is the more you build, the slower it runs.
Exactly.
And I see that on Reddit all the time is, I have a $2,000 computer, it should run perfectly.
Not necessarily, yeah.
There's still like the misconception from a lot of players that the game runs terribly.
Play Roller Coaster Tycoon World, then you'll see a game that plays terribly.
Play Roller Coaster Tycoon 3.
Yeah.
That game runs like garbage.
Yeah, it does.
It has a memory leak problem, like a bad one.
That's the other thing, too. Is like Roller Coaster Tycoon 3's build area wasn't that large. I think Roller Coaster Tycoon World's build area was also made smaller because of the game. Planet Coaster has a massive build area.
It's too big, in fact.
It's way too big.
They actually made it larger post-launch.
Yeah. It's so funny because I remember in alpha, people were saying, the map's too small, and then they gave us bigger maps, and they're saying, well, now the game doesn't run good. Well, hello.
Don't use the whole map.
And now we have the opportunity to make it even bigger with the scenario editor. Speaking of, should it have been in the game since day one? Is that a thing that casual players were missing? And is that one of the reasons why we don't see any Let's Plays anymore?
Can I answer this topic in like one sentence? Yes, it should have been in day one. Partly the reason why we don't see Let's Plays.
I know this is a very unpopular opinion, but the scenarios are garbage.
I don't think that's an unpopular opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I don't think it's an unpopular opinion, but it still should have been in on day one.
Exactly.
You're talking about the Frontier built scenarios?
Yeah, and now that we have the tools, we see why they are not that great. Is because, like Billy was saying when he was developing his scenarios, there are no fail states. There's no feeling that you're going to lose anything. There's no game. There's no game in any of these scenarios.
I remember saying that in alpha. I was like, how do you lose? Oh, you can't.
Yeah.
I'm going to play sandbox.
If you have a game that you can't lose, then of course it's not going to do well with casual players.
I mean, the definition of a game is something with a rule set that has a win state and a lose state. So if you don't have a lose state, how are you a game?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not fun, but it's not a game.
So I don't think it would have saved anything because the management side and the way that this whole game was set up was a game without fail states. And if you don't have that, then you don't have the pressure of trying to beat a game. They finally introduced fail states into the scenario editor where you have a certain amount of time to get something done or something that actually takes away from, how much you're spending. Because if you play a scenario long enough, you're going to make enough money. It's not going to be hard anymore if money is the goal. Yeah. So if you introduce a 1-year fail state, then you have pressure and then you have to make decisions that are a little bit more in depth than just, I want to place this because it's pretty.
Let's think about the old games, RCT 1 and 2. They had, if your park rating drops below a certain level, you fail. There was a certain number of guests by a date. There was park rating by a date. And then there was total roller coasters by a certain date.
There was paying off your loan.
Yeah.
You don't need a lot of fail states, but I think the weakness of the scenario editor and a lot of the Planet Coaster career mode scenarios is that the pacing is terrible.
Yeah, you need urgency. There's no urgency to do anything.
Well, not only that, but you can make a lot of money very quickly over a short period of time in the game. And once you have infinite money, it's the same problem with City Skylines in the non-sandbox mode. Once you just kind of wait and get all the money in the world, there's no challenge and you're basically in sandbox once again.
Yeah, and here is where I feel like Frontier missed the opportunity if they were going to make Planet Coaster a management game, because I feel like as a creative game, it succeeds very well. It has these tools that make it very easy to do what you want to do once you know how those tools work. But as a management game, if you look at a theme park day-to-day operations, like where are you losing money for one? How are you making money? Like these organizations are not making a crap ton of money. The decisions that they make are very targeted and very risky sometimes, like when you're building a new coaster or something like that. I don't know why theme park games can't have that same kind of like that feeling of risk and loss. It just never happens.
Touching on the scenario editor just kind of post-release here, its delayed launch has actually hurt the scenario editor. There really isn't much momentum on the workshop right now. It hasn't changed really that much since launch, and a lot of that comes from just users trying to figure out how to do it, and a lot of that comes from the pain of playtesting because you have to play out the entire scenario, and unless you get it done the first time, like, oh yeah, I was perfect, one and done, you're going to be playing that for a long time. It's not really worth it. And I feel like now it's just used as a more advanced sandbox. Oh yeah, you can remove park boundaries. And it's really easy to make like a really tight scenario or tightly tuned scenario that lasts for like 6 months. It's really hard to do that lasts for like 2-3 years, which is what most people kind of want.
To me, like the best use of the scenario editor that I've seen is just people who build different entrances to make the map look different.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Then people just play it in sandbox anyway, or like in the basic challenge mode with all the goals turned off.
I think another thing right now is the coaster builder. And my thought process is the casual player wants to go on the workshop, find a cool coaster, and place it down. The hardcore player wants to make that cool coaster.
I actually disagree with that. One of my hobbies is going into Planet Coaster and finding somebody who's literally never played the game before and starting it up for the first time and laughing at them as they trip over the all the shortcuts.
That's me.
You're a dig.
Well, I mean, I don't say anything. I just lurk and I go, this game's tricky. I'm a horrible person, I guess. Anyway.
That doesn't actually make it better.
It totally doesn't. But everybody's first thing, they load a map up. I want to build a roller coaster. How do I build a roller coaster? Nobody wants to go into the workshop and download a roller coaster.
Fair. Yeah.
They want to build a roller coaster. And they don't care if it's realistic. They don't care if it does anything. They just want it. They want to build a vomit comet.
I think there are multiple types of players. I really do think there are players that just want to go in the workshop and download.
Really, I think a lot of people go to the workshop and download the coaster because they're so frustrated by the coaster builder.
That's possible too.
Yeah, I think they do that afterwards. But initially, it's I want to build my own roller coaster.
They're trying to figure out shit for like half an hour.
Not even 5 minutes.
And
Oh, I agree.
The feedback sucks. Like, okay, the piece goes red when I can't make that turn, but like, why? Improving the coaster builder improves the experience for both players.
Back in alpha, there was a small contingent of players that wanted 2 modes to the coaster builder, and that was a simple mode and a hard mode, or advanced. Simple would quite literally be RCT3. So everything is like piece by piece pre-built, like very, very painfully limited, but you could just kind of plunk together a roller coaster and have something that looks decent and works within the game rules and doesn't kill anybody and in general just does what it's supposed to. And then in advanced mode where we have what we have now.
Small things that they could do to tweak the coaster builder. For starters, like the heat map system in the coaster builder really sucks.
Oh yeah.
It's usable to an extent, but you can't really drill down. So I'm thinking of a system where you can mouse over a piece and get stats of the car when it passed over that piece at the last time. So get speed, get angle of the piece, get G-forces, and actually make a piece inspector.
Which would serve the hardcore player.
A little tweak like that could go a long way to appeasing, the people who are hashtag continuous roll. We're probably never going to get stuff like that, but we can get these little tweaks that could improve the experience. And I think via trickle down could improve the casual player's experience too, because if the coaster builder is easier to use, we're going to get a lot more realistic, beautiful coasters built in the game.
Overall, I think the coaster builder itself is still easy enough to use. There's pre-made elements that you can throw in and such. I think there's a lot that goes into just comparison though, where like you make your first coaster and like, all right, this looks great, and then you either look at real world examples or look at other people's work and you're just like, oh wow, what I made is absolute crap. Like, I don't want to do this ever again.
Or just write it and you realize that it's absolute garbage.
That too.
Yeah.
Right.
The POV just goes either too fast because you have like a 300-foot drop on a wooden coaster that turns down at like 80 degrees, or, maybe you went too crazy with some elements. Like, there's a bit of an experience when it comes to making a coaster for not only just casual players, but even for a lot of hardcore players too. Mainly focus on buildings. Because it is something that's hard to learn. If you dive into that, you're basically doing a professional's job. You're having to learn about the physics of things.
What about the rating system? We have that in game. Does it help casual players to build good coasters?
The rating system is the worst feedback.
Yeah.
You build this coaster, you're like, sweet, it's great. I think it's awesome. It gets fairly high marks, and then you see orange, and green for nausea. You're like, why? What is it?
Yeah.
Why? Why can I never build a green coaster?
It's not rewarding the player to build realistic coasters.
No.
100% isn't.
No, it absolutely isn't. You can build a drop that goes, 200 miles an hour at like a 90-degree angle, and that spikes to 20 excitement, and it's like, oh, I made the best coaster ever.
That's death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really easy to get all green ratings, basically, is if you have a realistic coaster and change the banking inwards to outwards.
Yeah.
Done. fun.
Oh boy.
That's not how it works, sorry, but
No.
When people send me a blueprint to look at, they'll be like, oh, take a look at my roller coaster. It's really good. And I download it and I'm like, well, do you want my feedback? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, and then I criticize like the bananasness of it. I'm coining that term, by the way.
Bananasness?
The bananasness.
Slick term.
I'll criticize it, and then they'll be like, but the ratings are good. I'll be like, but I don't care.
But I don't care. It sucks.
There's also an issue with adding coasters to a park too and just figuring out the ticket price for it.
Yeah.
You know, in Roller Coaster Tycoon, it was just, oh yeah, take the excitement rating. In Planet Coaster, there is actually a tried and true method of getting the ticket price, but it's way more complicated. And
I have no idea how tickets prices work.
so here's a hint. I didn't come up with this. I sadly don't know the name of the person who did. Basically, you take the ride's prestige and divide it by 37.2, and that is your ticket price.
What?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's your perfect ticket price.
Perfect.
why?
I don't know. And, you know, you might not need a super exciting coaster, but you can get that prestige up through scenery, through queue scenery and through track scenery.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Let's piggyback on top of that with some more feedback. Queue scenery, ride scenery. I think that at the beginning of the development, they really got caught up in this, the game is the UI. I don't know if you guys remember, they were pushing the concept of the animation system being the UI feedbacks loop, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And I think they really got caught up into that and like kind of forgot about some core things that they could have added to the game to help with the feedback in the UI itself.
Yeah, because if a peep gets off a ride and then they start like looking around, I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means still.
Yeah.
If you even spot them looking around.
Is it like they can't find what they're looking for? And how do I fix that?
Are they disoriented because the nausea, or are they like?
I have no idea to this day.
I think that Frontier thinks that their characters are a lot more emotive than they actually are. I need a big bubble above their heads with a sad face if they're pissed.
I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with the way that the characters animate. I think that they just need to take it further.
I think we can boil all these small points we just mentioned down to one thing. The game doesn't explain itself very well, and Frontier doesn't do it either.
We're left to figure out.
And I think that's actually a point that scares away a lot of casual players. They don't know how to do shit because nobody explained them.
Planet Coaster is a weird case because it should be easy to explain, but it isn't.
Visually and graphically, it's very easy. But yeah, there's no tutorials. There's nothing that says how you do things.
There's the video tutorials, but
There's no tutorials in the game. There are YouTube videos.
Yeah, and the YouTube videos suck.
Yeah.
Have you watched them?
yeah, no, I've watched them.
Yeah, I have.
I haven't, actually.
I did actually when it first came out.
Someone made a comment on Reddit the other day. They were asking, is there a tutorial scenario? And I'm like, no. And then I'm like, why?
I mean, like, think about Roller Coaster Tycoon's 1 tutorial. Basically, the game held your hand, did things automatically to show you how to play, like, Forest Frontiers. You built a merry-go-round and a junior coaster, and then after that, it's like, it'll say, like, okay, now we're going to leave the game, but you can kind of hijack it at that point, and then be like, oh, now I'm going to play, and then you already have 2 rides down because you're that lazy. But, like, something like that even just, let's just kind of walk you through things, how to, do the controls of the game. Planet Coaster is more complicated.
Even if it was just cheesy, like King Coaster popped up like Clippy style and said like,
Oh, do you need any help with this?
Yeah.
place a ride. Now we need to make a queue. Click on the queue. And, I mean, like, that could go a long way with endearing new players to just want to take it a little bit further in the game.
Do you remember shortly after the game came out, the most popular Planet Coaster videos weren't building videos of Silver Edge and shit? They were like basic, really, really basic tutorials, like how to move your camera and stuff like that, how to build a path. I mean, that shows a lot, I think.
My number one tutorial video is how to use the camera, which to me is like the most basic thing ever. Like, how do you control the game, basically?
6 months after release, Mott told me that there was a button that would reorient the axis to the world axis. And I was like, what? Like, the button's right there. I just never clicked it.
And like the advanced controls, they're a huge part in actually kind of making a vision come to life in Planet Coaster. If you don't have access to that, it becomes a laborious chore.
It just goes back to the problem of feedback. There's no feedback. Whether you're building a coaster, whether you're starting the game and you're trying to figure out how to move the damn camera, there's no feedback anywhere.
Yeah.
Whether you see a peep and it's like, oh, I'm hungry, but it's gonna leave and not get a burger. It's gonna go on another ride, and it's frustrating how little feedback there is.
And you think about other simulation games, like there's visual information everywhere. You have meters, you have menus, you have speech bubbles in a lot of cases, and it's an important part of of the simulation because you need to have that information to figure out which dials to tweak in your sim.
So right now, the only way to figure out shit is watch tutorials on YouTube.
Or play Rubel's interactive tutorial.
True.
Right. There are great resources out there. The problem is the casual player going to look for those resources? No, they're probably not.
No.
Let's get back to YouTube for a second here. Shortly after the game came out, you saw a couple of Let's Plays among all these creative building time lapses out there. You don't see any Let's Plays now. Is that hurting the game because casual players want to play the scenarios and they don't have any source on YouTube simply because nobody makes Let's Plays anymore of Planet Coaster?
So is the solution here for Frontier to sponsor content creators to make Let's Plays to improve the game enough to the point where people want to make Let's Plays on their own? Or like, I'm not sure what the solution to this problem is.
There's not really a way that Frontier can fix it because it is purely based on community perception.
Right.
All Planet Coaster is known for are the crazy Silverette builds or the crazy Rudy builds. It's become almost synonymous with it at this point.
Brocoaster's good.
Yeah, Brocoaster's good.
I feel like we are doing our jobs as hardcore players to inspire people to pick up the game and try it. What the game does and fails them is that there's no feedback to actually make that bridge.
Yeah.
So it just becomes frustration. And then you have people who have the game, but they only watch like one of our series or something like that because they feel like they want to be in Planet Coaster, but it's out of their reach. Basically.
Yeah.
Quick question regarding that. Is that partly our fault because of the mostly highly edited time-lapse videos we put out?
I'm going to say no before you even finish. It's not our fault.
Which make it look so super easy to build amazing stuff like that in Planet Coaster, which in reality isn't. Should we tell the people more often how many hours we have in-game, how hard it was to achieve what we achieved?
Of course. I say that all the time. It's very easy to look at a screenshot and say, that's great, but what you don't see are, the thousands of hours potentially even that went into making that final product, and also the mistakes that went into creating it and the trial and error, and the 15 times that they made it and didn't like it and deleted it and started over. You don't get to see that stuff.
I always tell people when I'm streaming it, don't compare the stuff I'm making to stuff that you're making. I have over 1,000 hours in this game and I'm a crazy person. This isn't comparable. You're just going to hurt your own progression of learning how to detail build.
Yeah, as hardcore players, as the people who are supposed to be trying to break the game, we're doing our job.
Yeah.
We're putting out inspiring content.
Reverting back to what Adfo was saying, when we started making content, that's all that you could do. There was no management game there.
We were also really excited to finally play the game too. I mean, we're just players. We were casual players at that point who became hardcore players.
True.
And there was nothing to do in the game. Like, quite literally, it was just you plop down 4 rides and then whoop, game done.
Yeah.
So we made a game out of building, and that then took over all of the YouTube content because we had months of us literally just playing this unfinished product.
I think there might be room to have guided tutorials and builds where it's like, today we're going to be working on this and explain how what this building or ride is the history of it and all that, having more examples. Frontier could work on that a little bit more in their own blueprint selection that they give players who just want to plop something really quickly.
I just had a crazy thought. How about Creators Thursdays, where they have someone come on their YouTube channel and just make a building in an hour and talk about design concepts and talk about how to use the tool set to build a building in the game.
Tailoring content in a way that's similar to Bob Ross.
Yeah, here's something beautiful and you can make it too and I'll show you how, type of thing.
And then what you learn here, hopefully you can apply that going forward with your own projects.
Kerbal Space Program had a setup a number of years ago where their official channel on Twitch, they would find hardcore players and they would bring them on there and get them to stream on their channel, and they would do an hour-long build. I've desperately wanted Frontier to do something like this forever. But I think they're too protective.
And I think these are lessons for Planet Coaster 2, if it ever comes out, if that ever, ends up being a program that they want to continue with. Because right now, they've lost that community and they're not going to get it back.
Yeah, sure, there's a market for that type of content, and sure, us as creators could come along and make that kind of content.
I just don't think there's an audience.
You don't think that there's an audience for that?
Not anymore.
I disagree.
I would disagree with that. I think the audience is still there. It may be work to capture them. You're not going to just show up to the party and be the king shit right off the bat, but
the audience is there, especially after every Steam sale.
Actually, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And I think time lapses and YouTube builds potentially could have been that, but they weren't.
Yeah.
It's certainly a lot of work, and I think that it's something that maybe Frontier should have taken the reins on to help push their game into these channels that maybe they missed out on.
You saw it with how they were courting certain streamers for Expo.
Right.
It's like, these people aren't going to be around, or when you turn your backs, they're going to be gone. They're going to be gone in the next game.
Don't get me started on this, please.
You need to cultivate your own superstars. You need to cultivate your own silverettes. You need to cultivate more of those people. You have to do a little research and see if these people are actually producing content on a normal basis for your game or for your company.
Actually, I think they tried. Looking back at the first public event at Gamescom like 2 years back, they had people like the Lady Signer on, who was basically nobody back then. She had, like, if I remember correctly, 250 subs on YouTube. That's it. And she wasn't invited because she can reach out to a lot of people and had a lot of followers, but because she was a good builder. And I think Frontier tried to make her one of their own superstars.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all. What I'm saying is I think they needed to take that to the next level. Take those builders and create their own content channel, essentially.
Yeah, I agree.
And push content through the people that were already excited about the game. They did push the game through, like, I don't want to name any names because I don't want to disparage these people who got sponsored to go there or anything. I'm sure they, gave their best performance for what they were doing at the time, but it didn't necessarily, like, endear a long-term growth around those communities, basically.
Man, it's really hard to not name names, I agree. But, like, there was a PAX where they sponsored a bunch of streamers to fly down there of varying sizes, and the only one out of that entire group off the top of my head that still plays the game to my knowledge is Zillionist.
Frontier has a duty to itself and to its stockholders, because they're public, right, to sell copies of the game. So they need to decide whether or not a feature or a DLC will sell a copy of the game versus whether or not it will endear them towards people who already own the game. And they have to weigh things like time investment, money investment. And so I'm wondering whether or not we want them to focus on DLCs versus making the game that we have right now better, selfishly, in that we want to have a better experience long term in the game we already have.
I feel like they've done a really good job with that anyway with their expansions.
They found a balance.
Yeah.
You have to look at theme park trends currently, and it is IP heavy. So IPs and licensed DLC can improve. I mean, the biggest one would be Disney, because if this became a Disneyland simulator, this would sell so well, but that's a hard license to acquire. Well, they've taken inspiration from Disney with the Adventure Pack, being influenced by the Jungle Cruise and Indiana Jones, Spooky Pack being influenced by, especially by Phantom Manor. Going forward, though, you can look at other theme parks like superheroes that you see everywhere in any Six Flags park at this point, probably also at Disney, probably expand a little bit more on sci-fi if you wanted to, but I'm not sure if that's really going to be the big trend.
Could be with Star Wars.
I think that the 2 DLCs are amazing. Like, the items that we got are so good. Like, I'm worried that I'm going to forget about the items in the base game already. The selfish player inside me says, I want DLCs all the time. That's just me.
I want 1 pack of these a month.
So, like, I would rather just get more DLCs. I want to see the game grow, and I want to see Frontier be able to grow to the point where Planet Coaster 2 is a thing. I would love to see a realism pack. Small posts, chain link fences, ladders.
Americana is what I would call it.
I think they can find ways to fit those things in. That's kind of what we might be seeing going forward. The targeted theme park trend DLC packs would sell probably a lot more than just a generic, like, oh yeah, we decided to work on, I don't know, a beluga whale theme, because why not?
You have a very good point there, because we, as hardcore players, want the realism pack. The casual player on the other side,
they don't know what they want.
Maybe they don't know, but either way, they don't ask for more realism. They want the themes they have in their local parks, or the big parks they know, like Disney.
A set of casual players are a heck of a lot more likely to buy a pack that comes with a whole bunch of larger-than-life, out-of-this-world cool stuff versus a pack full of air conditioners, fences, and garbage cans.
Well, of course, I'm not looking looking for like the chain link fence pack. I mean, they have to obviously be able to find a way to build, you know, interesting scenery pieces, but there are other areas of the game that they could expand on, like the statues, for example. There could be more in-scale statue pieces.
Lamps.
Yeah.
Flower beds.
Oh, more flowers would be awesome.
There's a huge range of pieces that could fit into that pack that would appeal to a wide range.
I think that's another thing to think about is that single player games have a much shorter shelf life than anything multiplayer.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
But creative games can have really big longevity. I mean,
For the core players.
Yeah.
look at people that still play RCT3.
I still play RCT2.
Yeah.
There's always around 80 to 100 people online playing multiplayer RCT2.
But still, they are the core players.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
To know about Open Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, you need to be a core player.
I hear a lot of people saying, oh yeah, but Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 had a lifespan of 15 years almost. No, it didn't.
No, it didn't.
Fucking didn't.
Half a year after the last expansion, most of the people moved on and played other games. Only the core player base remained. And that was mostly because of custom content.
Exactly.
Right, but it was such a small community at that point.
Planet Coaster's actually doing kind of well, all things considered.
Yeah, like it's doing supremely well, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sure they can see the numbers too, and yeah, more DLC, more content.
Yeah. Is there some sort of conclusion that we've drawn from this?
So, did Frontier listening to core players hurt the game? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think we helped make the game.
I think we did help too, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Frontier didn't really have a good idea of what they wanted to build in terms of management, and I think that's what hurt them.
And I think even just the tech that we have currently accessible hinders a lot of what they can do with guest AI and management and a lot of the background simulation that we would require a lot of system overhead too.
They came up with a brilliant plan, though. The particle-based people is a really smart idea.
It still brings me joy when I see peeps walk around and do stuff in my park.
I never see walking peeps around my park because I never play with people.
You never play the game.
You don't have parks.
Shut up, Mike. That's not true. I have parks.
All three of them.
I think initially the hardcore player base hindered the early adopters, but I think over time we've changed the way the game's been developed so much that it's starting to wrap back around, at least since Spooky DLC. It's started to wrap back around to, oh, you know, this is a game that I'll plop into and build a castle in once a month for the casual player rather than a game that you play scenarios in.
I think a game like Planet Coaster needs both the hardcore and the casual player. The hardcore player because it needs people that stand out and show what's possible with the game and amaze the people out there. And the casual player because Frontier needs the support and the money of the casual player to continue support the game and make it better and better and give it more content over time. So it goes hand in hand, in my opinion.
There are still ways we can improve, though, just in terms of showing that, oh yeah, this isn't an impossible task to make this. Even just from us to other users, in my stream, I get it a lot where, like, you really get me inspired to play Planet Coaster, but I can't do what you're doing and I don't want to play it anymore.
I hear that every day, all the time.
Yep, same.
And it's okay.
It's okay.
People ask me all the time, what's your tip for a new player? Have fun. Open up the game and just have fun.
Yeah.
Try to build something. Yeah.
Start small, work your way up.
It's easier if the person is already really interested in theme parks, so you can just say, hey, take a look at a theme park that you enjoy. Look at one picture. Try to build one of those buildings and see what happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, guys, I think we had a pretty good discussion about casual versus hardcore players. As usual, for our viewers and listeners, thanks for viewing and listening. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, whatever it is, we have a wonderful comment section. Feel free to use it.
Pinch it off.
I hate you. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Love you guys. Take care.